Dr. Mitchell serves as a perfect example of the importance of this different mode of producing knowledge. In her first collection of essays, which is a groundbreaking work that brings together some of the essential texts that theorize the African American literary tradition within the circle, Mitchell is able to demonstrate how there's an ongoing conversation about African American literature and bring it together in one collection. And so she's really able to show the genealogy and the development of thought around a body of literature that heretofore had not been collected in one source. And so it's a very useful text, not only for the classroom, but also for the development of the tradition. Similarly, in her monograph, she's able to think about how Black women writers have contributed to ways of knowing through acts of recuperation. And so one of the things that's central to the Black women writers tradition, which she explores, is how they borrow from modes of expression that earlier generations used but went undocumented, were missing from the archive, were absences or vacant from the archive. And so one of the things that African American literary tradition does in particular, but Black studies does more broadly, is thinking about how to fill in the gaps that have been left in history. How, as Susan Lloyd Parks says, to dig for the bones and listen for the voices. And Dr. Mitchell, in her scholarship as well as her role on campus as a teacher, really gets us to listen for those voices that have been silenced, or those voices that are hushed, and asks us to think about what these silences and these gaps mean.
With regard to freedom to remember, one of the interesting things about literary criticism and the work that we do in terms of literature has to do with epistemologies. And so even the terminology that she uses there, where she helps us to not think of slave narratives as that, but to think about them as emancipatory narratives, to focus on the construction of freedom as opposed to slavery, to think about how the texts were looking forward while they were thinking about the past, I think is pretty important.
And then most recently, the text that she co-edited with Danielle Taylor, the Cambridge Companion to African American Women Writers, I think is also a very important contribution to scholarship. And in some ways, it builds on those other projects to begin to pull together scholarship dealing with Black women writers and with the texts that focus on Black women's writing traditions. That's a crucial text as well, because it helps us to begin to think about them in different these books in new ways.
Dr. Mitchell has impacted students that I've worked with, and actually I admire and respect her for what she did in the spring semester of 2010. She helped fund a course that I taught called The Fire This Time. And in that class were 12 students who were outstanding and did really terrific work. It was a class where students found their voice, and it was great to revitalize The Fire This Time. It's one of those things where she's impacted more than just the students who she's taught, but students who I've worked with, because if it had not been for her support of that course, I would not have met those students. They would not have had an opportunity to revitalize The Fire This Time and write some amazing articles.
And Dr. Mitchell has been tireless in working with the university to try to get additional faculty lines to make the African American Studies program a robust, critical literary area, critical inquiry for our undergraduate students of all types, regardless of who that student is. And I think she's been largely successful in launching the African American Studies program on our campus.
So part of what I also want to draw attention to is the role that Angie has played as a mentor. When you think about Angela Mitchell at Georgetown, you think about African American Studies, you think about minority mentoring, you think about the graduate program, honors thesis advisor, master's thesis advisor, and all these different roles. But I will say that in the role as minority mentoring, this is how Dr. Colbert also got pushed toward the PhD programs, and there's several other students who, because of her mentoring, because of her accessibility, her concern for the professoriate, but also the students at Georgetown, we were able to move forward. And this is a lot of the unpaid, unaccounted for labor that is significant to the institution, both symbolically and in terms of the material outcomes. And so I think that it's important to note that and to make visible that invisible work and how students are coming back even for this program today to talk about how Dr. Mitchell was the director of African American Studies before there was an African American Studies program to be a director of. And I don't think that we should lose sight of that, and we should always be grateful for that and record that in this history.